Hare Krishna. Welcome, dear devotees. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are on week 2 of our celebrations. So we spent the first entire week with so many wonderful speakers, trying to dive deeper into studying Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And today is going to be no exception. We have a wonderful speaker with us, Her Grace Sitala Devi. Sitala Devi actually needs no introduction, but for my own purification, I want to share a few things about her. She has over 5 decades of devotional service to Srila Prabhupada's movement. She was initiated in the year 1971 in Detroit. And from there on, she has served the movement in so many different capacities, starting temples, worshiping the deities. After she moved to Vrndavana, after opening her, business where she would embroidery clothes for the deities, she spent a lot of time in Vrndavana. And if you've been to His Holiness Indradyumna Swami Maharaj's yatras, you have probably heard her. She has also been a part of the planning and organization and devotee support in Sridham Mayapur, where she presently resides with her husband Harishori Prabhu and their daughter. It's such an honor to welcome Sitala Devi on this platform, and she's going to help us dive deeper into the life of Srila Narottam Das Thakur and highlight the first Gaur Purnima festival in Khetri Dham. So please, let's meditate together and welcome Her Grace Sitala Devi. Hare Krishna.
Hi, Krishna. Thank you so much for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to delve again into the life of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. Let's first offer my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Desatarne Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Vanchakopa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So I'll start today by quoting a well-known verse. Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastri Koi, Lavamatra, Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hoy. Chaitanya Charitamrita. The verdict of all revealed scriptures is that by even a moment's association with a pure devotee, one can attain all success. So this association is there just by hearing. We don't have to be in the physical presence, but simply by hearing about Narottam Das Thakur, we can in some way be brought into his presence. So even more than a few moments of association will be very purifying for myself and hopefully for everyone. So we'll try and bathe in his association for a little while. It's so uplifting, and actually it is essential for purification. There's a quote here. I'm not sure where I got it from, but it's nice. I'll read it. The lives of the saintly persons are rich with the sweetness of loving service and are therefore worth repeated study because they are most dear to Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Without such study, we will never understand the nature of devotional service. By relishing the lives of great devotees, we become attracted by their compassion and we develop affection for them. So since the Lord is kind to his devotees, this is the road to becoming an object of his affection. So there's very practical reasons for these types of classes, so we will try and touch a tiny drop of the nectar of this topic. Of course, as Vrndavana Thakur says in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, the transcendental excellences of the Lord's associates are so limitless that even in 1,000 years, I would be unsuccessful in fully describing them. And that's Vrndavana Thakur, the Vyas of Chaitanya Leela. So what to speak of this very small person. But anyway, we will try to touch something, and we'll see. We'll try to focus on Narottam's role in spreading Lord Chaitanya's mission, and specifically, particularly his role in establishing the Gaur Purnima festival. It's very instructive to get a sense of the time that Narottam Das Thakur came into this world, which was in or around the time of Mahaprabhu's departure. So he is a second generation devotee of Mahaprabhu. And it's just interesting to see how much of the Hare Krishna movement, as we know it, is due to his and other second generation devotees, how their efforts, through their efforts, they kept it alive. I find it interesting to see, depending on when you're born or when you come into the movement, you have different experiences. If you came in the 60s or the 70s or in 2000, you're born into the movement at different times. You really have different experiences, different challenges. And so I find it relevant, especially for the second generation, our second, third, fourth, and onwards into the future. Those generations, they will also have to face similar, both ecstatic and daunting task of pushing the movement further forward. So it's interesting to look at the times that Narottam Das Thakur came into the mission. He didn't see Mahaprabhu, and yet he did so much. So we'll explore that time when Narottam Das Thakur was born. Lord Chaitanya's mission was still in very much a seedling state. His short time, 48 years, it was not a long time that he was present in this world. And he was, the single charismatic authority from which a loose-knit group formed around him who deeply, deeply loved him. But there was no fixed structure. He wasn't really giving, administrative direction to his mission. There was no central executive body. There was no individual successor. So it's not surprising that, after Mahaprabhu's departure, certainly this was a challenging time in many ways, even though there were, so many great devotees that were still in the world. But it's not a surprise that for many, many years, it was difficult to reach a working consensus of the nature of their group and how exactly the mission would go forward. some parallels after Srila Prabhupada's departure, of course. As Prabhupada said, whenever Acharya, what to speak of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, leave, there's some chaotic situation in some ways. Not completely because of so many great souls that still were there, but definitely there were challenges. And, it was clear that Lord Chaitanya wanted Prema Bhakti spread, but, how would that happen? Some kind of form and direction or some structure was certainly going to be necessary to achieve that end. And although Lord Chaitanya himself didn't do it, he set everything in motion so that the next stages of development were definitely going to happen. And Lord Chaitanya's role was really to demonstrate what Prema Bhakti looks like. He showed us the whole thing by how he lived, by who he was. But he gave the responsibility of explaining it to Rupa and Sanatan, particularly. And he tasked them with, very difficult task, the systematic writing to explain everything related to Prema Bhakti, everything that Mahaprabhu had come to give. All the guides for spiritual practice and narrative and poetic and dramatic literature. And Mahaprabhu also, he lined up so many others to assist. Lokanath, Bhagarbha, Kashishwar, Gopal Bhatta, Raghunath Das, Raghunath Bhatt, they were all sent. This was all orchestrated, that the soft institution would begin there in Vrindavan by first writing the books. And we knew this was meant to spread far and wide, but without books, how would that happen? And so the books would be the primary means. It just wouldn't be sustainable without clear direction and writing down exactly what Mahaprabhu came to give. So it's interesting that Lord Chaitanya, he began this emphasis on the written word. That started by him, that as we have this phrase, books are the basis, and then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that carried that forward in, a wonderful way. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he, took that to unimaginable heights. And in the same way, to set up his mission, he first he wrote the books, and he had some books printed. And so following very clearly in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada. And, although he worked very, very hard to establish the hard institution of ISKCON, but he did say that even if everything failed, even if all the temples collapsed, the BBT must remain. And that way, he will always be present. In other words, his books had to remain, no matter what. Whatever catastrophe may happen, who knows? But the books must remain. And so it's wonderful how so many of Srila Prabhupada's books have been translated in so many languages and distributed. Who could have imagined, And I think Prabhupada made the BBT a separate entity for this purpose. Like in case ISKCON had, the institution collapsed, then, somehow that would go on. That was so important. So all this, at the time of Narottam's birth, all of this was taking root in Vrindavan, this, beginning of everything, of Mahaprabhu's actual mission. And but Narottam was born in the town of Khetri. I won't go through, try not to go too much into what had been said in the past, regarding his youth and his growing up and everything. But just to give a little background, that he was born in Khetri to the to Krishnananda Datta and Narayani, king of Khetri. So he was a little prince, and he grew up very pampered and very protected. And he did have the opportunity to hear about Lord Chaitanya at a very young age. And immediately he had intense spontaneous attraction to hearing about Mahaprabhu and all of his associates. So that became his, very quickly in his young age, his obsession. And he did receive inspiration through dreams from Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and they encouraged him. And, long story there of how he finally got away, how he finally ran across the country. And finally, well, of course, after receiving the gift he received from Mahaprabhu at the Padmavati, he could not stay any longer. So he ran away. He did manage to run away to Vrndavana, which was his dream. And arriving there, that was his dream come true. And at that time, what an exciting time to arrive there, It was booming. Everything was under construction, both physically and philosophically. He immediately, very soon after arriving, he made his connection with his spiritual master, Lokanath Goswami, and he became the student of Sri Jiva Goswami. Imagine getting your education at the lotus feet of Sri Jiva Goswami. And there he met his lifelong friends, Srinivas and Shamnanda, and they lived this, incredibly idyllic life in the best place in the universe and with the best association. What could be better? But Sri Jiva Goswami, he had this huge responsibility, huge. It's amazing what he shouldered. It's just so vast, that both practical and philosophical, he was responsible for developing everything, construction, purchasing land, legal things, deity seva, seeing that it goes on, the writing, the editing, the copying, creating a massive library, teaching students. I mean, it is just astounding what he did. It's astounding. And he was also responsible in some way towards the Vaishnavas in Bengal. He was in regular correspondence with Janavamata. And, while everything was percolating in Vrindavan, Bengal so far away, they were not really privy, to, what was being written. And all that Lord Chaitanya had spoken to Rupa and Sanatan, they weren't aware of all this yet. And so naturally there was some growing diversity. Nothing contentious, but, different viewpoints and philosophical and practical. And, the Vrindavan Goswamis were a little skeptical or a little concerned about the unsystematic developments in the East. And Jiva Goswami and Janavamata, they understood, a very big need to unite everybody. All of Mahaprabhu's devotees needed to be united and put on solid philosophical ground. And so Jiva Goswami, he devised different strategies to push this forward and to mend the growing divide. And one of the main ones, of course, was to send the books to Bengal. And it would be his best students that would be the instruments that would transfer this sophisticated theological technology over to the other side of India. And so he arranged a Kartik festival where all the Mahants would come. And he made the announcement that we need to send the books now, and I want my best students, Narottam, Srinivas, and Shamananda. I want them to take everything, what we've been stockpiling for so many years, and take that to the devotees in Bengal. And so this was a shock. This was a shock to Narottam and his friends. This single utterance, it dissolved their tranquility. They had dedicated their lives to being in Vrindavan all their life, no other thought of anything else. So you imagine the mental turmoil, ordered a half a continent away from everything that they loved. And, they might be thinking, well, what offense did we do? What did we do wrong that we're banished from our gurus and Braj? And said that they were inconsolable, wept for hours, but they had no choice. They had the command of their gurus, and they had a very honorable mission. And so they did not protest. They're very, very disciplined and committed. And so they dedicated themselves immediately to a new life that, they could scarcely conceive of. And they reoriented their lives to an active life of public service in their homelands. And basically beginning the first organized preaching mission. And their job, it wasn't just to deliver the books. It wasn't, they'll carry them over there and then whatever. They had a much bigger job. They had to explain it all. They had to represent it all. They had to spread it far and wide. They had to begin in a similar way, a soft institution in Bengal. It was a very big mission they were given. And of course, Jiva Goswami empowered them with appropriate titles for the tasks. Narottam Thakur Mahashaya, Srinivasacharya, Shamananda Pandit. And so they walked away from all that they loved with no idea whether they would live or die. It was dangerous, just with the faith in their gurus. They were going to have to figure it out themselves. It's never been done before. And, little did they know that, the next decades, what they did that would change the face of Vaishnavism in Eastern India completely. And, you can't help but see the parallels, how similar it is to Srila Prabhupada boarding the Jaladuta. No support, no idea, no idea what will happen, what's going to happen. Just the order of the spiritual master, full dependence. And, with no idea how much he was going to affect the whole world. Just amazing dedication to the instruction of the spiritual master. And of course, it's also amazing that Srila Prabhupada almost immediately transferred that spirit to his disciples, sending them off to far-flung corners of the world, to push everything further. So it's very interesting dynamic. And of course, it's not going to end there. It's not like it's all done. the next generations, they're going to have to step out of their comfort zones and, make a lot of sacrifice and become very, very determined, because there will be new challenges, new strategies required. We're just really beginning. This is just the beginning. There's a very exciting unfoldment, over time of Mahaprabhu's mission. And what a wonderful opportunity. So Narottam then, after won't get into the journey, but harrowing journey of losing the books, which they did recover. He arrived in Khetri and he began his preaching activities in his own hometown, which was a little radical, going back to the home after you've been a renunciate, but it was Jiva Goswami's instruction. This is the best way. He was the Rajkumar before, so he would have a lot of influence, and he did. And people saw, our little Rajkumar, now look at him, this Thakur Mahashaya. And so it was very, very powerful, and he began his preaching there effectively. And soon after, I'm not sure how long, but he decided to go on pilgrimage. He'd not been in Navadvip or Puri, so imagine how much he must have wanted to see. There were still some associates alive. And so, he went on this mission for inspiration and to get association and to do kind of an environmental scan. I mean, he's meant to preach, he's got to see what's going on. And he saw that, the associates of Mahaprabhu, they're like so immersed in separation from him that they're just crying. And, there wasn't much active preaching going on. And he saw that there were separate groups in the different places, all the different Shripats of the different great devotees, but they weren't really connected to one another. And then, of course, he saw the general mass of people are just, into materialistic, ritualistic religion and, becoming degraded. And so, he had this mission that he's supposed to share, unite, spread far and wide what he'd learned in Vrindavan. And, how is he going to do this? He would have to be creative and innovative in order to be effective. And so one of the strategies was that he began to initiate, which was radical for a Kayasta, which was his caste. Well, they didn't do that, so he did something. He made a radical move because it would work. Not only did he initiate it, he initiated from dacoits, he initiated brahmanas. I mean, that was, he got some enemies for doing that. And but it's interesting that, a preacher, sometimes they have to uphold the traditions because it'll be better for preaching. And sometimes they just really don't. They do something new, different. Like Lord Chaitanya, he took sannyas, the traditional sannyas, because it was good for his preaching. But then on the other hand, he made Haridas Thakur his namacharya, Muslim, gave him the highest position. So it's interesting, that to be a preacher, it's not just black and white. You really have to work according to time, place, and circumstance. And so Narottam was very, very good with that. His strategy was to write songs in Bengali and explain everything from A to Z in those songs. It's very effective way. People like to sing. People sang all the time. Let them sing these songs and learn everything. But the big game changer was his idea to have a mega Mahotsava in Khetri to celebrate Gaur Purnima, the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he got this inspiration when he was on pilgrimage, and it was a very ambitious idea and a brilliant idea that he would accomplish many things at one time. It wasn't just, oh, let's have a mela. It was a big opportunity. It would be if people would come. He didn't know. That it would bring these various lineages together. And, you know, because the prominent followers of Mahaprabhu had developed like their own groups, and that had grown a bit independent and sometimes differing in form and practice. And at this festival, for the first time, he could bring together and link all these communities to a larger tradition, link everyone together. And, you know, so it would be a chance also to show a united front from the, you know, representatives from Vrndavana and Janavamata, who was the head of the whole, you know, Bengal Vaishnavas, to show that they are in support of each other. They're not doing different things, totally on the same page. And it was also a chance for those associates who were feeling so much deep separation that to come and have, you know, a big Maha Sankirtan in the way that they had done in the presence of Mahaprabhu. So how, you know, enlivening and blissful that would be for them. And then also would establish deities, and that would, you know, give a central place for expanding the mission. And it would also, you know, of course, having a big mela, it would attract the common mass of people into the fold. You know, it would help to spread everything. And most importantly, it would be an opportunity to deliver the books and the teachings, especially the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you know, to organize the philosophical and physical structure for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, you know, to basically kick off a united Hare Krishna movement in Bengal and Orissa. So, you know, there was a lot to be achieved by this. It wasn't just, you know, a little celebration. It was a big deal. And it would be an opportunity to resolve, you know, issues and divergent viewpoints. I mean, not that there was anything heavily contentious. Everyone was committed to chanting the holy name in Kirtan. But, you know, there were things like even Lord Chaitanya's divinity and his worship, it was seen in different ways by different devotees. You know, everyone had different relationships with Mahaprabhu, and he had himself had revealed himself in different ways to different devotees. And most of the time, he just showed himself as a devotee. You know, sometimes when the devotees wanted to glorify him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he would not let that happen. You know, one time in devotees started singing his glories in front of him, and he just, you know, he just went away, went home, and went to sleep. And then devotees came, and then he allowed them to continue, you know. So, you know, everything was not clear to everyone. There were diverse philosophical conceptions about Advaita's position, Nityananda's position, Gadadhar's position, differing views about who are these personalities, What is their place? And of course, the Bengalis on the on the Bengal side, their emphasis was they just worship Lord Chaitanya, they chant Hare Krishna, and then they hear all this coming from Vrindavan, the Goswamis emphasizing the worship of Radha and Krishna. Well, that was different for them, so trying to assimilate, all what's going on. It's not so easy. And then naturally, there were also some pollution creeping in, which always happens everywhere. Bengal was rife with Shaktas, Hajias, Buddhists, plenty of possibly polluting elements that sometimes were creeping in here and there. So it's interesting to note that in all times, even when the Supreme Lord is present, even when his greatest associates are present, there's contentious issues. There's challenges. There's different viewpoints. There's sometimes confusion, So it shouldn't be surprising, and it shouldn't be disappointing. It's just what it is. It's the nature of this realm. It's not, it's not going to become utopia. So, we see in ISKCON in such a short time. I mean, there's so many divergent views. Ritvik and Jiva's Fall and Guru Tattva and Raganuga Bhakti and, in all societies, you're going to find this. It's not something surprising. And the next generations, they are definitely going to have to confront all sorts of new struggles, viewpoints, challenges, the conservative, liberal views, no doubt. But if the acceptance, if we don't have unrealistic expectations, things are not going to be perfect. There will be challenges. You look at all of our acharyas, mega challenges. So, best not to have unrealistic expectations is the point I'm making here. There's a statement, I don't even know where it's from, but it said that expectations are resentments under construction. And as Shakespeare also said, expectations are the root of all heartache, So don't expect things are going to always be peaches and cream. They're not. And our challenge is in the midst of everything to just remain committed and Krishna conscious. It's an individual choice. Sort of Narottam Thakur and Janavamata, they were kind of first Gaudiya Vaishnava mediators. And Janavamata's involvement, it was crucial. So the other, which I guess they were, it was the first conflict resolution. And one of the most important, and that must be talked about a little bit, was establishing the Chaitanya Charitamrita as the final word in Gaudiya Siddhanta. It just cannot be overstated how important that work was, to mend any divide and to establish Lord Chaitanya's mission on solid philosophical ground. And Krishnadas Kaviraj is an absolute genius. As in just in the first chapters, he practically clarifies everything, in a systematic way, step by step. He explains the entire doctrine of Gaudiya Vedanta. He explains Lord Chaitanya's divinity, his external and his internal reasons for his appearance. And he explains who is Lord Nityananda next. And he makes it very clear his huge role in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and that you don't have one without the other. Chaitanya and Nityananda, they go together. And he explains Advaita then, and Gadadhar's place and their identities. And, through the explaining the tree of bhakti and the way he explains all the lineages, including everybody, leaving nobody out, all the branches and all the twigs. And it's remarkable what he did. Brilliant. Using biography as a means for theological discourse, the story and the philosophy together. And then just presenting it all in a seamless whole with precision and, sensitive storytelling. It's great scholarship. He merges the two communities, is distilling the essence of the Goswami's books and quoting Srimad Bhagavatam, while also combining all the various, previous biographies, information within them. It is amazing what he did in his old age. And also, writing in simple and very attractive Bengali poetry. It's so beautiful, the Chaitanya, even you don't know the language. I remember when I first heard it, I just sounded so beautiful. And, so by writing in Bengali, all the Goswamis were writing in Sanskrit and Brajapali. And so he wrote in Bengali. So in that way, it could really, everyone could have access to the highest teachings of Mahaprabhu. So the Chaitanya Charitamrita, establishing there at that festival in Khetri, this was most essential for the success of Lord Chaitanya's mission. So, maybe I spent a lot of time on that explaining, but, to get us to understand just how important this Khetri Mahotsav was. And so, when Narottam, he got this inspiration, and when he returned to Khetri after his pilgrimage, he got a message from his Guru Maharaj, Lokanath Goswami, and he encouraged him that you should install deities. The general mass of people, they need this. And so that even more confirmed, Narottam's idea. So he became very enthusiastic about that, and he immediately shared his idea with his cousin, Santosh Dutt, who was now the king of Khetri, and also his disciple. He'd become his disciple. And Santosh was very enthusiastic about it, and he immediately said all expenses, he would take care of all expenses, and he would help for managing everything. So that was a big step forward, having an idea for a festival, but, it costs a lot of money, it's a lot of work, a lot to manage. So his cousin, came, very enthusiastically to the front. And then Narottam went to Jajigram to see Srinivasacharya. And at first, Srinivas was a little, he was a little uncertain about whether this was really a good idea. He was a little more experienced. Narottam had never done anything along these lines. And Srinivas had, as a Brahmin, he had, he had more opportunity for management and installing deities and pujas and things like that. And so he was thinking, how are you going to get everybody to come? How are you going to be accommodated? How are you going to feed them? And, all the practical things that have to happen when you have a big festival. And so he was a little doubtful. But that night he had a dream, and Lord Chaitanya came to him and said, I want this. This is a wonderful idea. So Srinivas threw himself into it with enthusiasm. First thing he gave Narottam, his dear disciple, Ramchandra Kaviraj, to go back with him to Khetri and begin. And so first thing was that messengers, they were dispatched far and wide, very far and wide. It was a big thing. They had these invitations that were inscribed with elaborate Sanskrit poetry, and they invited all the Mahants, all the Vaishnavas, and also kings, landowners, poets, scholars. They really expected it to be big, so preparations began in full swing in Khetri, building an ornate temple, storehouses, kirtan hall, guest facilities, bathing pond, flower gardens. It was a massive undertaking. And all of Khetri was just bustling, preparing for this. Narottam was having deities made, 5 sets of Radha and Krishna deities, and one deity, golden Mahaprabhu deity. There's a whole story around him. But Narottam was making his own very personal preparations. He was composing songs and creating a style of kirtan and training musicians and pouring his heart into these songs and kirtans in a way that he'd never done before. And so this was his personal offering to the Khetri festival that he understood very, very well, the potency of pure sound vibration. And, well, after all, sound is the origin of everything. And there's nothing more powerful. I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to read something about the science of sound vibration. Some excerpts from Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, which are really quite amazing. It's maybe a little bit long to read, but I think if you can concentrate, you will find it quite striking what he's saying about sound vibration. So I'll just read this. When Brahma creates the universe, the seed ingredient is the sound Om. And from that Om, the Gayatri mantra is born. In this sound, the 14 planetary galaxies sprout like whirls of spiraling stars and planets. Each planetary system is composed of a different sound uttered by Lord Brahma. It is the function of Brahma to provide these different galaxies and planets according to the sinful and meritorious deeds of the innumerable jivas. Lord Brahma utters a different sound for each planetary system, and his engineer, Sri Vishvakarma, creates the planets according to those sounds. And the individual jiva is also endowed with a particle of creative power. And the ordinary individual as well creates his tiny sphere of influence by sound. Some jivas' spheres of influence are no bigger than their own craniums. And some jivas have influence over a community, a nation, or even a whole planet. The beauty and harmony of their particular spheres of influence depends on the quality of sounds they produce. When one nation tries to conquer another, the first points to capture are the radio stations, the newspapers, the journals, the lines of communication. By sending out its manifesto by sound, the government can move the former leaders from their posts and capture the country. Then also by sound, the new government becomes established. If there should be any defect in that sound, then the whole thing is ruined. That is why there's so much altercation in the world situation. The sound of all these jivas is, to quote the Bible, babble. Nonsensical sounds are entering and contaminating the ether, the air, the water, and the very molecular structure of each and every person, place, and thing. The world is intentionally being invaded by the waves of defective sound. So many lines of communication are filled with impure sound, from the earliest school books to the most advanced so-called philosophy. The White House filibusters are another excellent example of intentional pollution of sound channels. One sage has explained that massive epidemics are due to contamination of the ether by impure sound. When the lawyers and pleaders in court begin to tell lies in the name of justice, these sound vibrations contaminate the ether, which in turn contaminates the air and water which people breathe and drink. An epidemic is the result. Interesting. Of course, transcendental sound, that is something entirely different with the opposite effect. The holy name is the channel by which the infinite descends. If we were to infuse the spiritual sound into the ether, if we were to saturate the ether with the transcendental sound vibration of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, this Mahamantra would purify, enlighten, and saturate every being with its potencies. And then he explains, Lord Chaitanya explains the 5 profound effects of transcendental sound in just the first verse of his Shikshastakam. First, Chaitodarpana Marjanam. It wipes the dust from the mirror of the mind. The mind is forcibly purified. All the material concoctions which are the cause of our suffering are forcibly murdered, starved to death. Flooding the mind with transcendental sound is just like stepping on the pin of a bomb. All misconceptions of material suffering, enjoyment are shattered, murdered, and the material mind is conquered wholly, leaving no enemies behind. The mind then reflects the spiritual knowledge, quality, and energy of the soul itself. And then 2, Bhava Mahadevagni Nirvapanam. The fire of conditional life is thus extinguished. This body has been burning from the very beginning of its duration by the process of digestion. Biologists all declare that the body is a burning organism, giving off heat, water vapor, carbon dioxide. After 70 or more years, our body is consumed by that smoldering digestive fire, and we move into another body only to burn up that one too. It is like chain smoking. With the lit end of the cigarette, you light up a fresh cigarette, and on and on. And by the potency of the transcendental sound, the cause of that fire is extinguished. And then 3, Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidya Jivanam. The transcendental sound then spreads the light of benedictions and peaceful suggestions, and fearlessness and no more anxieties invade the mind. The Maha Mantra floods the mind with affirmative suggestions of truth. And then Anandam Buddhibardhanam Pratipadam Purnamrita Svadanam. A full draught of an ocean of blissful nectar is served to the soul who's been thirsty from time immemorial. And then 5, Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. The holy name bathes all souls with spiritual bliss, knowledge, and love. The transcendental sound completely overcomes the souls with his sublime potencies. By uttering the pure sound of the Maha Mantra, one invades the very cause of everything that exists. The mind, body, and soul, and even nature itself can be changed into transcendental nature by one heartfelt exclamation of Hare Krishna. Capture the sound waves, which are the cause of every item of existence, and saturate them with the holy name. The result will be the total transformation of energy. So amazing. This is a science of sound. It's the practical means to change the world. You know, there's so many people, they have their hopes and their plans by some political or social or economic adjustment. Things will improve, but, you know, as long as the atmosphere is filled with impure sound, well, their efforts will definitely fall short. So pure sound vibration, it must be increased. And of course, this is Narottam's full realization, as he states in his songs, Goloka Premadan, Harinam, Sankirtan. And this was his intention, was to saturate the environment there in Khetri at this mega festival with the pure sound of the holy name, and, you know, make everyone dance and cry in ecstasy. So that was his plan. After long, long preparations, the guests began to arrive. And, you know, you can imagine, they don't know, they're wondering, will they come? Will everyone come? And they were anxious. And so Narottam, Srinivas, Shantos Datta, everyone was at the bank of the Padmavati as the boats began to arrive in Khetri. And the river was just filled with boats. Janavamata coming across on a specially built boat just for her and all her associates, Minikatam Ramdas, Murari Chaitanya, Vrndavana Das, and then all the devotees from Ambika Kalna, from Navadvip, from Kardaha, you know, all the Gaudiya Mahantas. Everyone came. And there was just unrestrained joy on the bank of the river. As every person that arrived was given a garland and chandan and shouts of Jai, Jai, Gornitai all over. So it was true bliss. And each guest was guided to their accommodation, and they were given a personal servant to tend to their needs. And everyone was so delighted as they entered into Khetri to see, you know, the preparations. It was like everywhere. Every lane was lined with banana trees, and the buildings had mango leaf garlands, decorations, and rice flower rangoli designs were in the entrances of every building and home. And you could just see everywhere, you know, people were busy, garlands being made, heaps of flowers, and, you know, big men grinding huge pieces of sandalwood, you know, and putting into buckets, you know. It was just everywhere. There was massive fires built, gigantic pots for cooking, and scores of people cutting vegetables. And you imagine this mega, big festival. It was very exciting. And Khetri just came alive immediately with kata, kirtan, prasadam distribution. It was truly ecstatic for everyone. And finally, they were prepared. They had the Adivas celebration the night before Gaur Purnima, where they would, you know, to Adivasas to invoke auspiciousness for the next day. And first they worshiped Janava Mata and all the other senior devotees and did those special invocation prayers for the Adivas and kirtan throughout the night. And then finally the festival began the next morning. Thousands of enthusiastic devotees were there, excited to worship Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on this very, very special day. Kirtan was roaring, and then eventually the Deity installation began. This was all orchestrated by Srinivasacharya. He brought forward the deities. He did the whole Abhishek to the ecstasy of everyone, all the Radha and Krishna deities, and Gauranga Mahaprabhu deity, beautiful golden form of Mahaprabhu there. And then finally it was time. It was time for Narottam to sing. Now, I'm going to read this bit from my book. So silence descended on the courtyard. All eyes were on Narottam's face. Taking the kartals in his hands, Narottam sat down in the center of the musicians and nodded to Devi Das to begin. Narottam sat erect and closed his eyes. His face became meditative as he listened to the sound of Devi Das's deft hands dancing across the mridanga's heads. With a gentle smile, he began to sing, his voice imbued with devotion. Poignant verse after verse glorified Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, flowing from his mouth like a stream of nectar. The crowd was captivated. This was a divine sound, a new and extraordinary type of kirtan, unlike anything they'd ever heard. Many of the Vaishnavas began to cry as they listened to the poetry praising Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Narottam gradually increased the tempo, and the devotees in the audience clapped and swayed to the beat. As Narottam became more and more deeply absorbed in remembrance of the Lord, his brow furrowed and his body trembled. The cymbals in his hands flashed in the morning sunlight, and tears of happiness flowed down his cheeks. One song after another poured forth from the depths of his heart, each a condensed Veda, conveying volumes of transcendental knowledge. Each raga perfectly matched both the mood of the song and the poetic rendition of Lord Gauranga's activities. As the music flowed forth from Narottam's tongue, the sweet pastimes of the Lord came alive in the listeners' hearts. Skillfully shifting the mood, style, and tune, Narottam then sang the glories of Radha and Krishna. The inundation of pure sound flooded the courtyard with spiritual energy, engulfing the audience in bhakti. No one remained unmoved. All were swept up in the waves of Narottam's prema. Narottam was now oblivious to his surroundings, and he sang on, his body drenched in perspiration, mixed with his own joyful tears. By now, many devotees were dancing, forgetting everything but the bliss of kirtan. As Narottam continued, He noticed an extraordinarily sweet scent filling the air. This was clearly not the fragrance of the flowers or incense. It was an unearthly, intoxicating scent, which as it swept through the crowd caused row after row of devotees to swoon in ecstasy. Narottam realized that the fragrance was coming from the deities. With this realization, he felt a profound sense of separation from the Lord, and he changed the melody to match the mood. He thus led the crowd into ever deeper states of spiritual emotion. The air became thick with the mood of separation until the devotees were so profoundly affected that it appeared everyone was moving in slow motion, like wading through honey. Then, like a flash of lightning in a mass of rain-darkened clouds, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates suddenly appeared beside the musicians. Stunned, Narottam reached out and actually touched Lord Chaitanya's hand. It wasn't a dream or even a vision. He was there, and everyone, qualified or unqualified, could see him. Shivers of ecstasy ran through Narottam's body. His hair stood on end, and tears shot from his eyes like water from a syringe. Sri Janava Mata burst into wild sobs at the sight of her beloved husband, Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Sripati and Sri Nidhi stared in stunned shock at their brother, Srivas Pandit. Sri Achyutananda raced up to his father, Advaitacharya, and danced wildly beside him. Then the son of Sachimata, Sri Gaur Chandra, lifted his long golden arms and gracefully began to dance. The kirtan exploded. Kartals clashed and mridangas thundered like wild elephants stampeding across the desert. Devotees clapped loudly, jubilantly, chanting, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, again and again. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showered each devotee with his merciful glance as he whirled and spun with his beloved associates. Grabbing hold of Narottam's hands, Sri Nityananda Prabhu pulled him to his feet and began to dance with him. The earth trembled beneath their feet as Lord Nityananda's shimmering blue dhoti swished from side to side. His reddish lotus eyes rolled with intoxicated joy as he spun around the courtyard. Nearby, Sri Advaitacharya danced through the crowds of devotees while roaring like a maddened lion, and Gadadhar Pandit danced joyfully beside Srinivas Acharya. Narottam's heart was bursting with ecstasy as he surveyed the assembled devotees. It seemed everyone was there: Rup, Sanatan, Raghunath Das, Kashishwar, Murari Gupta, Haridas, Swarup Damodar, Vakreshwar. It was as if the clock had been turned back, and once again Mahaprabhu was enjoying his ecstatic pastimes in Navadvip. Utter transcendental madness reigned in the courtyard. Some devotees held hands and danced, while others cried or trembled. Some stood motionless, staring in disbelief as Lord Chaitanya danced around them, while others fell unconscious. Some lay on the ground, drenched with their own tears, and others simply called out, Krishna, Krishna, again and again, mad with ecstasy. Some devotees, wanting to offer everything they had to the Lord, they began throwing coins and valuables, not knowing how much they were giving or even whether anyone was receiving their offering. Oh dear, the Maha Sankirtan thundered on, and the devotees dove deeper and deeper into the pure nectar ocean of the holy name. Flooded by waves of ecstasy, the chanters lost all sense of time, place, and bodily identification. They no longer considered themselves higher or lower, larger or smaller, younger or older. All material thoughts were eradicated. Philosophical misconceptions, doubts, and confusions were instantly washed away in the purifying waves of kirtan. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's family was united. So, was that festival successful? Yeah. So it was a grand success. And it accomplished all that Narottam had hoped for and more. And everyone was fully satisfied. And of course, word spread like wildfire, far and wide. Did you hear what happened in Khetri? And so the Khetri festival became one of the most important milestones in Vaishnava history. And naturally, it became an annual event. And that tradition has gone on for over 500 years. And thanks to Srila Prabhupada, he brought it to the West for the first time and has expanded it in just unimaginable ways. Even in the early 1966, 67, immediately he established the importance of the celebration of Gaur Purnima, and he gave instructions how to observe it. And as soon as they purchased the land in Mayapur in 1972, February, they held the first Gaur Purnima festival here in Mayapur. Just a handful of devotees. There was a makeshift bridge across a ditch entering into, everywhere was just empty rice fields. Devotees, there were some tents for the devotees, and there was Srila Prabhupada's thatched hut. And there they were. And there was a curtain in the middle of the hut. The deities were behind that, and Prabhupada and his servants stayed on the other side. And there was just a hand pump for everyone to share and some kerosene lamps. And still, Srila Prabhupada said he was so happy that this was, even if he were given a palace, he would prefer this lovely hut in Sri Mayapur Dham. And it was the first time that pilgrims, they saw the foreign devotees celebrating Gaur Purnima as a pretty historical event. It was small, but very, very significant. And then Prabhupada, he established that the importance of observing this festival, and that the devotees should come to Mayapur at all costs. He didn't mind that they would, what the costs would be, but from Chaitanya Charitamrita, it said that the members of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness should go to India during the birth ceremony of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Mayapur and perform Sankirtan congregationally. And this will attract the attention of all the important personalities in India, just as the beauty, bodily luster, and Sankirtan performance by the associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu attracted the attention of Maharaj Prataprudra. Prabhupada considered it essential for unity and purification of ISKCON. And Prabhupada had, very big ideas of how to expand it. He wanted big prasadam distribution and big displays of what was going on all over the world. He wanted Bhakti Shastri exams going on, parikramas, and it's just absolutely remarkable how that has expanded over the years, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Remember when the Russians started to come, and then there's so many Chinese coming, and it just kept expanding. And it actually is quite miraculous. Millions of people come now for Gaur Purnima. And the celebration, it means so much to us, so we can remember that this is all what we get to experience, is all the grace, by the graceful mercy and the powerful efforts of Narottam Das Thakur. I want to read just a little I have this excerpt of something that Ravindra Swarup wrote, which I thought was quite beautiful, and then we'll end there. I think I've gone on too long, but maybe we can fit this in. 1974, the first worldwide, when devotees really came from all over, far and wide. Well, he says, I remembered that first pilgrimage, how we camped among cement bags and stacks of lumber, grew weak and thin from diarrhea, but sick and tired, we found strength to go every day on parikrama, chanting and dancing to the holy sites. It was a landmark occasion. In the last century, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had revived Lord Chaitanya's movement, infusing it with preaching power, and had predicted that the day would come when the devotees from all countries would converge in Mayapur and chant Jai Sachinandana, Jai Sachinandana. And so we did. One bright day, a flotilla of wooden boats wallowing heavily, their decks packed with standing devotees, brought us to the far bank of the Jalangi, where the house and samadhi tomb of Bhaktivinoda Thakur stood. For some time we sat on the outdoor cement platform before the samadhi, gazing at his statue, while a devotee sang Bhaktivinoda Thakur's sweet bhajans, Bengali bhajans. I was surprised then by the bliss I was filled with for no reason, by a feeling of peace and security beyond measure. It was as if a cool breeze were blowing from Vaikuntha, the spiritual world, banishing the anxiety of material existence. This sensation grew more powerful. I became aware then of the presence of some vast paternal spirit, peaceful, powerful, and infinitely caring. He gathered us under the embrace of his arm. I was so happy the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I looked at the samadhi and recognized the presence I felt. I felt so powerfully. In fulfillment of the prophecy of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we had traveled to this place and he had come out to greet us. We were all in his personal presence. I looked at the devotee next to me. He was radiant. Isn't this amazing? I said. Yes, he answered happily. Against all odds, Krishna had brought me to Mayapur, and Mayapur was on record as a place where prophecies were fulfilled and miracles took place. Srila Prabhupada wanted us to meet here for very, very good reason. Who could tell what would happen? And so another Gaur Purnima is on its way, coming up soon. Who knows what will happen? Time for miracles, and surely Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates in various ways will appear to us. And we should just make sure that our eyes and our hearts are open, and that we can remember and feel gratitude to Srila Narottam Das Thakur, by whose mercy we're able to have this experience. So, all glories to Srila Narottam Das Thakur Mahashai.
Thank you so much, Mother Sitala. It was such a wonderful talk. You transported us to Khetri Dham, and the point that you made, that we need to open our mind and hearts, and your gratitude to Srila Narottam Das Thakur is just absolutely brilliant and so touching. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much to all our viewers for joining us. I see your appreciation for the talk, your questions, your engagement really makes it alive. And please continue to participate so actively. So we have a wonderful lineup. for the next coming weeks. So we're on week 2. We have 3.5 more weeks of wonderful Krishna Katha leading us into Gaur Leela, leading us into Gaur Purnima. I request you to take a moment and subscribe to our newsletter. You can see it flashing on our screen. Our website is gbcsbt.com. That way you'll receive a newsletter and stay updated about our upcoming events. So thank you so much for joining us. Hare Krishna.